This tutorial discusses civil society and how we as political scientists can study it and how we should be studying it. Civil society, of course, being this communitarian, classically thought of as this communitarian sphere of society where citizens come together for non-political reasons. You'll find it in Putnam and Tocqueville and other framings like that. So I will first start talking about two perspectives on civil society, maybe the classical liberal one. I'm not sure if that's the label Putnam would put to himself, but it's certainly a mainstream way of thinking about civil society. Contrast that to a neo-Marxist framing, and then go into a series of cases where we as scholars have to think extra carefully about civil society and about what this sphere does and how it relates to the rest of society, particularly, of course, government and the private market, and whether or not we've been romanticizing civil society too much. That's one of the classic concerns, really, within civil society studies. So, of course, just classically, we tend to think of civil society as this sphere unto itself. It's fairly separate from the government sphere, maybe not entirely so, but these three spheres, the civil society sphere, the government sphere, and the private sphere, are distinct from each other, and they do different things in society. That's one way we've been typically thinking about civil society. And that really, in many ways, is drawing upon the mainstream civil society literature tradition. And I'm going to say that this is maybe a classical liberal way of thinking about civil society. I'll contrast that to the neo-Marxist view of civil society. So if we look at de Tocqueville and Putnam, two classic researchers and scholars on civil society, in many ways their work really invoke a classic liberal framing of how to think about civil society, the sphere for private entrepreneurship, civil affairs, citizens that come together for public and private purpose, as I already mentioned. It's independent from the state. That's why we say non-governmental organizations. In other words, organizations that are not run by government, that act as meeting places for the citizenry. And the importance of this accumulation of social capital, that's what Putnam is talking about, this high trust between individuals and society that really is a result of these spontaneous interactions between citizens, and how important and a vibrant civil society is for democracy. This, of course, draws on Putnam's classic study of Italy. And you'll find this applied in, for instance, development policy, in foreign aid. It's very common for foreign aid agencies to turn to a promotional civil society organizations and NGOs in the global south as a remedy to poverty. The perception being that the state is not to be trusted in authoritarian countries, so let's turn to civil society instead, which really gives civil society a very positive connotation, maybe. Now, I'll contrast this to the classic neo-Marxist framing proposed by Gramsci, which describes civil society in a somewhat different way. It's here more a battleground for the hearts and minds of the masses, really. So if society's class struggle within capitalism and the bourgeoisie controls the strategic points of civil society, then we can't really say that civil society is separate from the state. So by that strategic points, then, these are the examples: schools, churches, the media, the academia, which allows the bourgeoisie to shape and control thoughts and interests of the masses. So far from being separate from the state or the economy, civil society is really immersed in a capitalist context, but it's also the space for working against these structures. So say the neo-Marxist perspective. So this is what Gramsci argued. If you want to revolutionize society, then the working classes must wage what he called a war of position to contest this hegemony. That's what he called this control of all these strategic points in civil society. Uh, so if you control all these points in civil society, you have hegemony. And if you want to contest that, then you have to conquer these strategic sites. And that's why in critical theory literature you will hear the term counter-hegemonic project, which is really this creation of alternative spaces for social interaction that works against the powers that be. So these are two strongly contrasting viewpoints in some ways. So let's revisit this problematic of how the civil society sphere relates to the government sphere and the private sphere. Well, first of all, we can see that civil society, really regardless of if you go by the classic Putnamian view or you go by the neo-Marxist perspective, civil society is in a position of political and economic dependency. So many examples of this. You see fundraisers where civil society organizations depend on members, of course, but also on corporate sponsorship. Or they apply for government grants to do services in their local communities. And this is a dependency. Also, we have to remember that the social ethos that permeates the rest of society will also infuse civil society, of course. These 2 points about the dependency of civil society and the societal, and how the rest of society, the ethos of the rest of society also permeates civil society, are points raised by Chandhoke. And many of the points of Chandhoke I will also invoke again in this presentation. So a question here that comes out of this discussion about dependency and the relationship between civil society and the other two is, how do we draw the line between civil society and the other societal spheres? And I'll give you a few examples here of problems concerning drawing the line, just looking at organizational bodies and activities. So first of all, of course, we typically talk about NGOs, non-government bodies, but that's not the only type of civil society actor you will find. Another one is the GONGO, government-oriented NGO. And this is an organization that exists right here in the sphere between government and civil society. And it's an organization deeply interwoven with the government. It has board of directors that might be politicians, and there have been cases in the global south where a country is receiving foreign aid, where the government, where this foreign aid is to be allocated to NGOs, and then the government in this, and this is often an undemocratic government, in this receiver country has actually set up an NGO for the purpose of annexing effectively these foreign aid grants. But this NGO has then been staffed by the government to maintain effective control over the funds. So are these civil society actors or are they government actors? The same question can be asked about the Quangos, the quasi-non-governmental organization, which is a non-governmental organization, but that has been licensed by government to do very specific governmental functions, maybe regulatory functions, for instance. So those also exist. If we go over to this cleavage between civil society and the private sphere, then of course we can ask such a question as, can a private company ever be a civil society actor? So when it's raising, if a private company is raising money for a charity, is it then operating within the private sphere, or has it merged over to the civil society sphere? Another question of like that is, of course, what happens when an NGO, when the members of an NGO are all private companies? How does that operate? But even if we're back in civil society sphere, there are still questions about how we should go about studying it. And here I'm going to refer back again to Chan Hoke's points about issues within civil society. How civil is it really? So some critics argue, of course, that civil society might simply, because of its dependency, its economic and dependency on the private and political sphere, simply might lack the capacity to address root causes in society. And one classic example of that would be economic inequalities. And social capital, then, that has been seen as this generator of trust, might not be a panacea, because there are many civil society organizations that are really NGOs working for a totalitarian social order. White power groups, fundamentalist religious groups, extreme left groups, all these have come together spontaneously, organized by the membership, but what kind of social capital are they really accumulating? So as scientists, we have to be careful about how we think about the secular's importance for democratic society. And if we exaggerate its importance for democracy, or simply take for granted that civil society and civil society organization is always good, then maybe the effectiveness of civil society as an analytical tool actually becomes impaired. Now I'll finish here by just mentioning that Putnam actually has a response to this issue of what kind of social capital is being generated. And that response is dividing social capital into two types: bonding social capital and bridging social capital. So bonding social capital is when a group is coming together, and one of the primary activities of the group is to build identity and loyalty within this single group of like-minded, homogeneous in some sense, individuals. So they will be there primarily for bonding purposes. They are like-minded, they do not want to associate with people with contrasting views, whether it's in politics or something else. And thus it's a strongly bonding function. That's the rationale for this mobilization. And that can be contrasted then to the bridging social capital type, which really creates networks between these different groups. So this is why I've done arrows back and forth here between these two bubbles, because this type of social capital is capital that creates networks, that enables communications and enables relationships between heterogeneous groups in society. So this contribution, again by Putnam, is a way to resolve this problem of what type of social capital is being created. So that should give you a sense of the general trajectories and debates within civil society scholarship over the past few decades. Hope that was useful.